Hi, this is Stevie. Have you ever thought about adding lettering to your sketches but maybe don't know where to start? I have some good examples to show you, and maybe you can pick up a few tips from this. Here's just a very quick lettering job I did for the first page of my sketchbook that shows my favorite pens. Here's another one from when I visited the Tucson Botanical Garden, and I sketched in the lettering for the names of the plants. This one is just a sketch I did of some sewing items that I've had for years. And notice how I made the lettering at the top to look like thread and just incorporated it into the sketch that way. And here's a page I'm going to work on, but I wanted to show you some things that might not work. Here's an example. I had already painted this page, and it would have been fun to add lettering to the top, but I couldn't do it in the sky because it would bleed too much over that watercolor paper. Here's one that I want to do. This is just a horse that I sketched, and I really like the sketch, but it needs something, so I'm thinking of adding lettering to that. Here's another one I did of the old homestead at Tanca Verde Ranch in Tucson, and that had a nice white space at the bottom for lettering. That one I'll never do because I didn't like the sketch that much. This is another good example where I had some white space left on the sketch, and after I sketched the two horses, so I sketched in those words, best buddies. So what I want to do today is, since I have two pages, they're not next to each other, but they're both from the Tucson Botanical Garden, I wanted to use the same style of lettering for this page as I did on the other one. So I started out with my Rhodia pad of paper, and the reason I like that is it's a dot grid, so it's an easy way to space out your letters and to get them get the right height. And so I was playing around with different things. I tried cursive writing, which I didn't think would go well with this sketch. And then I thought I really would like to make it match the other sketch from the Botanical Garden, so I wanted to use that same style of lettering. There I was playing around with my elegant writer pens, which are, they have a flat edge to them like a calligraphy pen, and that would have sort of been a shortcut to do that lettering. But the problem I had was when I wanted to use the two colors on the letters, the yellow and the red, they don't blend well together, so I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'll be using watercolor. Now, one thing that, if you're just starting out, one thing that's good to know if you want to do thick and thin letters, the rule is for your downstrokes, they're thick. So if you naturally make a downstroke, like when you make a T, that would be thick. Your upstrokes are thin. And so hopefully I'll demonstrate that. And I don't follow that 100%, but that's a good rule to follow. That's a good calligraphy rule. So the first thing I'm doing here is figuring out where I'm going to put those letters. And I have one challenge where I have a flower, one of those pansies is coming out of the frame that it's in. There I'm just kind of looking at what I had done before to get an idea. But I need to work around that pansy that's sticking up. And so I had to figure out what words I could get on one side of it and then what words I would get on the other. So I decided to put the word Tucson on the left side of that little flower and then Botanical Garden on the right. And so I'm penciling it out right now, doing my thick and thin letters. And notice that the letters are not all on one line. That's called bounce lettering. And the idea is you do one letter on the line and then one below the line and just keep following that pattern. And it's kind of a fun way of lettering to make it look a little more whimsical. So now here I was just working on getting the spacing for adding the names of the plants below each of those frames. So I have the pansies, and what I was trying to do was get the word pansies centered in that space. And that's one reason I practice first is it's always a good idea to practice, but it also helps me get the spacing right, and I can get it pretty close when I go back a second time and do it on the actual page. So there I'm doing pansies in the bounce lettering with my thick and thin strokes. And this is just with pencil. I'll be going back later and doing it with ink. but this is, of course, is all erasable, which you'll see me erasing when I have something that I don't think is spaced correctly, or I didn't do the letter correctly. Sometimes I want the letter a little bigger or smaller. So I like to use pencil for this stage. I don't normally just go in with ink and do that. So that looks pretty good. So I'll move on to the next one, the poppies. And again, I'm looking at getting the word poppies centered in between the two edges of the frame of that little sketch. Keeping the same format with the bounce lettering. One letter on the line, the next letter below the line, and so on. And one thing about this page that's different from the other page that I did of the botanical garden, I didn't have as much room here, so I couldn't. In my other sketch, I had elongated the letters a little bit, which I liked, but I couldn't do that here. They're kind of squished together because I didn't have that much room on the height of each of them to get all of that in. And now I'm going for the third frame that I need to name, and those are my peppers. So I just start with a line, and of course that's all going to be erased. That won't show when I'm finished. And the word peppers, and trying to get that centered in there too. Same idea, start with one letter on the line and the next one below. And one thing to know when you're doing this kind of lettering, where you're doing the thick and thin strokes, is make sure that when you're doing each letter that you make it wide enough, because you have to go back inside that letter and add the width of it, on the downstrokes. So just make sure that they're not spaced too close together, and that you make each letter wide enough so that you can do those downstrokes within the letters. And I hope you're watching this on full screen. It'll be easier to see that way. There we go. And that's not exactly centered, but it's good enough. If I was entering this in some sort of competition, I would have been a lot more careful. But this is just my personal sketchbook. Now I'm going back, and what I'm using is my Micron, Pigma Micron 03, size 03 pen. That's a little thinner than the 05 that I normally use, because some of these lines are really close together. And I sped the video up so that you wouldn't get bored watching me do all these letters. But you'll get the idea. And notice those little flowers that I drew in there next to the word Tucson and after the word garden. And that's a nice little trick if you are trying to center something, or you end up with space to fill after you've put in all of your lettering. You can add a little flower or a heart or some kind of a swish at the end of your letters to take up that space, and then no one will ever know the difference. Now I'm starting to erase, and what I like to use for erasing is this vanish eraser. It comes from Jerry's Artorama. You can buy them online from Jerry's or at one of their stores if you have one nearby, and also Amazon sells them. And I also have a kneaded eraser, and I know a lot of people use those, but I feel that the vanish eraser does a better job of getting rid of those lines. So now that I've gotten the lines erased, the pencil lines, now I can go into watercoloring like I did on this previous page. So what I did was I had the top part of each letter in yellow and the bottom part in red. So I'm using my little palette here so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm just, and that is a Hansa yellow medium, by the way. And I'm using my smallest number 1 brush to do that. That's a Princeton Velvet Touch number 1. I really like those brushes. And I filled in the whole letter with the yellow. I don't know if you can see that, but the T, I actually did 2 letters. I did the T and the U, and then I went back after that with the red and did just the bottom half of each of those letters with the red. And they still should be wet enough that that color will blend. In fact, in some cases on some of these letters, you'll see that the red kind of crawls way up. And I'm okay with that. That's fine. But if there's too much crawling in your letters when you color them, use less water, and that will prevent some of that. The red that I'm using is called Anthraquinoid Scarlet. And I like that red. It's a little more vibrant than Cad Red Light, but it's pretty permanent, so it's hard to remove once you get it on. But I do like that color. So now on to the next word, the word botanical. Same thing. I'm coloring the lines first with the yellow and then adding the red to the bottom of each letter or section of letter. And you can slow the video down if you want to see me do it in more of a slow motion so that you can really see what I'm doing. Just filling them in. And I got to where I was doing several letters at one time, and I was able to do that without the letters drying too much before I added the red to them. And notice also how I mix up some letters. For example, in the word garden, I didn't capitalize the G. I think capital G's are pretty boring. I never use them. So I use a lowercase g instead. And with the R's, I rarely use a lowercase r because I also think they're boring. And so I'll put a capital R in there. And this is not formal calligraphy. It doesn't really matter. So, you know, you're free to do things like that, and I really like the look of that. So just moving on down the page, doing the lettering for the other words, pansies, poppies, and peppers. And it really doesn't take that long. The planning takes a lot longer than the painting. But it just adds a bit of whimsy to the page, and I just think it's so attractive. And it won't work in every case, but you might want to go through your sketchbook and find some examples where you think lettering could really enhance it. So there we go. And it didn't take that long. Thanks to the miracle of sped up video, this one was really short, but you can slow it down to have a better look at it. Just remember that it works best on white paper, so when you're planning your sketches, if you want to add lettering, leave some white space to put the lettering in or try to work it somehow into your sketch. And if you don't know which letters you want to use or which font you want to use, there's a really good source online called dafont.com. That's DAFONT, and you can get lots of ideas from there. So there you have it. I hope you give lettering a try. It's lots of fun. Do a little daily practice with it and you'll get really good at it. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and think about subscribing. Thanks so much.